Welcome to the Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast, where our goal is to recruit, educate, and inspire new hunters and to entertain the rest of you. Without the mentorship of responsible, conservation-minded hunters, this passion as we know it faces an uncertain future. So please stick around and be sure to check out our Facebook group, Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast, and like our main page at Fowl Front Outdoors right after this episode. All right, welcome to episode number 4. We're actually going to be talking about scouting, both digitally and physical scouting today. This is going to be Austin's last podcast for just a minute. He's got some work stuff that he's going to be out of town for just a little bit, but we're figuring out how to do remote Skyping and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, Ben, sounds like a good episode this morning. Looking forward to talking about some of the topics and trying to get guys out onto these lands and into their blind.
Yeah. And just a heads up, it is 6:15 in the morning on a weekend day, for us at least. And so if the brains aren't firing, 100%, you can probably attribute that to Austin not being a morning person. We do have coffee mugs the size of 5-gallon buckets out here, but
yeah, I think the coffee will get us through it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit harder for me to wake up on the weekends outside of duck season. But all right, so today, like I said, it's all about scouting, and a good lead into that is something literally NPR just talked about it like 2 days ago. When the time this is aired is about a week ago, but there are less hunters than there used to be. Some people would argue that is not the case based, specifically on the reason that I'm about to tell you why I think, or what is a main attributing factor to that, and that is lower land access, or not as much land access out there for people that don't own their own private land or don't belong to a hunting club or participate in the ever lucrative hunting leases. And so when you concentrate more and more hunters into a smaller area, it is going to appear that there are more hunters. So I don't know what you're...
Yeah, Ben, I think it's pretty interesting. I was driving in my car, not through my car, 2 days ago when I was listening to this little segment on NPR. And the most interesting thing, when I heard about that there being a decline in hunters and threatening conservation, was that this really is kind of an issue. But when I go out to go hunt, especially duck hunting, it doesn't seem like there's a decline in hunters. It seems like on public land, I'm competing against more people, and every year there are more new guys that have showed up to basically find the spots that I've been out on. But it is concerning, though, if that's the case, because state wildlife agencies and then the country's wildlife conservation system are heavily dependent on sportsmen for funding, because it's that user play and user pay funding system.
Right. Like we talked about before on the first episode with the North American conservation model, it's not the bird watchers, and I'm sorry, it's not the hikers, it's not the people that are going out and just taking pictures of wildlife that are funding conservation. It's the hunters and the fishers and the whatnot. So I believe, and I'm not going to get too wrapped around the axles here on percentages and the actual numbers and stuff, but as I understand it, we have about 5% of the population in 2018 that actively participates in hunting or buys a hunting license every year. Yeah, and
it's like NPR referenced from U.S. Fish and Wildlife a couple days ago, if nobody heard it, but that 5% of Americans that's 16 years and older that actually do hunt, that's only half of what it was 50 years ago. And then according to this little segment, that's expected that decline is expected to accelerate over the next decade. So that's a pretty tremendous thing to think about.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to remember, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but okay, the percentage is half of
Correct.
what it used to be.
Yep.
But we have more people that live in America now than when those numbers used to be double. But it's people say, oh, okay, yeah, so it's making up for the fact. I think that's just smoke screening the problem because, whereas there might have been I'm just using this number for a quick reference, where there might have been 100 licenses sold in 1970, there's still 98 licenses being sold in 2018, but the percentage is much lower, and it's not going to balance itself out because when people turn 65 years old, when the baby boomers they're getting there, they're almost there. Mm-hmm. They out hunt everybody. Millennials, Gen X, whatever comes after the baby boomers. Baby boomers have a very high percentage of their population that hunt. And they're approaching 65 years old. And at 65 years old, they stop heading out there. They stop, it gets difficult, whether they, through just general attrition, they're going to start tapering off their hunting activity. And pretty soon, we're going to be faced with a huge deficit of hunters as the baby boomers are out, and we are not. The subsequent generations have not recruited or retained new hunters very well, or at least not to the capacity to replace, if not grow, the deficit from the baby boomers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think a lot of that is potentially just the views that society has today, and hopefully we can kind of convince people of a little bit otherwise, because it's not just about going out and killing. It's not just about going out and taking the life of an innocent little duck. There's a lot more that goes to going out and getting in a duck blind and duck hunting and what that does for conservation. And I think today we'll be able to talk about how to do that and how to get some of this land access, and then how to scout out where you're going to hunt, whether it's public or private, and how you can help be a contributing member to this conservation.
Yeah, and there are a lot of factors into why hunting recruitment numbers and hunting retention numbers are dwindling, and I think one of them is there's a huge learning curve, hence the reason for this podcast. The other one is that it is intimidating when you show up on your first day of duck hunting trying to get out there. Maybe you're cutting your teeth maybe you brought your son along because you guys wanted to get into it or something like that. Maybe whatever reason you're listening to this as a new waterfowler, you show up and you got dudes backing up, $10,000, $15,000 boats into these lakes or these locks and streams, and they're tearing up the river and heading down the way, and they just know they look like they know what they're doing, and they do. You know what I mean? But when you get there and the only spot left for you and your son is this little tiny mud flat that's not ideal in any means, it can be intimidating.
Yeah, no, that's extremely true. I would say with a lot of experience hunting different bits of public land, that picture that you painted is exactly what I've run into. I think especially when I started to hunt without my dad, my brother and I kind of ventured out on our own. And we'd get into these public areas where everybody was locked up trying to draw a number and get out to a public spot. And you'd see all these guys whip in with their brand new F-250s and their what's the boat that guys buy at Bass Pro?
Is it the Tracker?
Yeah, the Tracker, or like the what are the big lawn boats that the guys have.
Center console.
Yeah, and
hey, we're not knocking on you if you got one of those.
No, but
we're just jealous.
I've just got like a canoe up on the top of my 4Runner, and I'm just trying to like get in and just paddle out to a little spot that I can shoot maybe a limited ducks at. I mean, it is the intimidation factor is there, and to some extent, especially if you're getting out on your own, there's a support group. If you don't have that support group that Bob and his 3 other buddies, all have, and they're at Bob's house the night before, drinking and getting all the decoys ready, and hanging out, and sort of in duck camp or deer camp, if you will, however you want to put it. That's a lot of guys. I'm just kind of rambling on here, but that's a lot of guys going out, and boosting each other's confidence to get out and kill some ducks, hopefully ethically, but it can be intimidating if you're out there by yourself and you're running into other groups of people like that.
Yeah. And like I mentioned in the Past Tales and Tips episode, it's never a bad idea to, if you're out there by yourself, trying to learn, you see a group of, as they would, maybe some hardcore waterfowlers, pretty good odds that they might let you hop in the boat if they got room. Or at least give you a piece of like, hey, we're hunting this spot today, but you might want to try this spot out to kind of whittle things down. But I guess it's a pretty decent segue into scouting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, it is 2018. Is it a digital? This is a digital era. This is we have the internet, and literally there's not a single place on earth that can hide from the ever-seeing eye of Google Earth. So I think we'd be silly to not talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. Where do you start, when you're talking about digital scouting? Because there's probably 5 or 6 different hunting apps out there that 5 or 6 different people would tell you are all the best ones. And I know we'll go through a few of those. But, yeah, I think at more basic level, though, Google and Google Maps, just right on your desktop, or if you have Google Earth, is a great way to start.
Yeah, that's what I use. So we're going to walk you down our steps that we utilize for digital scouting, and then we'll transition into what you actually need to look for out in the field. And we will hopefully get you the confidence and abilities to go out and find your next honey hole. All right, so I think step number 1 is knowing and finding your public lands. So there are many different organizations that manage and operate public land access. And they all publish maps, be it digital or physical. Where you go buy your tags and your license, they have maps there. I've never seen a Walmart that doesn't, right?
Yeah, no, and most of the time too, especially, well, not most of the time, you will always get like the state catalog, this hunting catalog, if you will, that's going to have that state's website on it, and you can get on that website. Mm-hmm. I think like Tennessee's is Tennessee Wildlife Recreational Areas, if I'm correct, like TWRA, and then Kansas, like Department of Fish and Wildlife for that specific state. And if you get on those websites and use those catalogs that those states give you when you buy your hunting license and pay your fees, that's going to have the link to the conservation areas that you're looking for.
I tell you what, if there's any New Mexicans out there, New Mexico has a really cool public land access map. It's sponsored by this app called Carry Maps, and I mean it's kind of difficult to download it, but once you follow the instructions, you can do it. But for the longest time, I just used that. It's cool. It lets you set waypoints. New Mexico has a lot of public hunting land, and if you ever find yourself stranded in New Mexico and looking for a place to duck hunt, go ahead and give me call. I'm not going to put it out on the radio, but I'll definitely I'll walk you on to some historically successful duck hunting locations. But back onto the public land access maps. I can't remember my dad's truck ever not having, at least 4 years worth of public hunting land atlases and whatnot. So
yeah, it's kind of like the Bible. At least analog when you're going out hunting. Same thing. I just remember because when I was a kid, it wasn't about getting online and going to the websites. It was all about the analog, like hunting catalogs, and not catalog that you shop in, because that's what it sounds like I'm talking about. I'm really talking about like the pamphlets that have all the regulations.
I think that's when I first learned how to navigate or land navigation, because my dad would tell me, hey, we're going to this little spot right here, and I need you to let me know. And we, hey, where are we at? Like, how many roads away are we? That kind of thing. And so that's a useful little tool. But like Austin was saying, almost every state this day and age has a digital map that you can find these locations on. And some of these places that we're talking about, so like who manages this public land? What are these names? So most of them are wrapped up, federally at least, they're wrapped up under the Department of the Interior. And then you've got the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Forest Service, National Parks, the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service. Some of them actually are just like, I'm not sure why, but just labeled Department of the Interior. And then there's the DOD, the Department of Defense.
Yeah, you've got Department of Defense and then Army Corps of Engineers, especially when talking about public land. If you're talking about hunting on any kind of military reservation or in and around any military base, the DOD and the Army Corps of Engineers, those websites for that specific location are going to be your best go-to to scout out where you want to go and to know what those boundaries are that are associated with the Department of Defense.
And I know some military installations actually allow civilians to come on and hunt.
Yeah.
And there's a lengthy pre-screening requirement that goes into that, and there's a lot more paperwork and a little bit more time to get out there. But what you're doing there is you are weeding a lot of people out.
Yeah, you are.
A lot of competition out.
I got a lot to speak on that too, and that could be a whole nother subject. But this last fall, I did most of my hunting all on Fort Benning. Unfortunately, it wasn't for any duck hunting at all, but I did a lot of public hunting on Fort Benning down in Georgia. However, it's kind of interesting, even though it was considered public per se, because the public and general population on Fort Benning and around Alabama and Columbus, Georgia were hunting on it. By federal regulation, it was like actually hunting on private land. So it's just something to think about. There are different regulations that apply to the benefit of the hunter, actually, because the bag limit per se for certain animals, then the different times that you can hunt were actually in your favor, as if you were hunting on like private land and you got like extra doe tags. So just one thing to think about when you're hunting on a military reservation, it could fall under some private regulations. Just check with that state and use your digital resources.
Yeah. And then another thing too, if you're not into that, but you do happen to see, the Army Corps of Engineers, that's not specifically tied to DOD. So you might be able to, there might not be as lengthy of a process in there. So don't be intimidated by any of that. All you got to do is pick up the phone, call and ask. People are going to give you the information, and people that work in the outdoor and conservation industry, and then like these public land, they love talking about this stuff. They they want to get you out there. They want to do that stuff. So like I said. There's also, I wanted to talk about like HLAP or HAP or whatever. There's a lot of other things. So I guess we'll talk about state land first. So we just talked about all the federal public lands, but the federal government does also, give public land over to the states. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's not managed nearly as well when whatever your opinions may or may not be about how things are managed at a higher level of government or at a lower level of government. A lot of times when land gets passed from the federal to the state, it gets chopped and hacked up and used for monetary income.
Yeah. I think it definitely varies state by state, but you're right. Land management is expensive. And if a state can sell it off and it can create a profit, then you're right. A state's probably going to lean to do that. And so I think you just have to hope, though, that some of these states have good land management programs to put in these state wildlife refuges, and then some more of our public hunting areas.
As always, this episode is brought to you in part by High Prairie Sportsmen, a group of conservation-minded outdoorsmen and women who have a lot of great content over on YouTube. Just go search for High Prairie Sportsmen over there and you'll be entertained for hours, and you might even learn something. They're very close friends of the show, and without them, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be possible. Okay, back to the show.
Right. And a lot of people, don't realize how important or how tied agriculture and hunting are.
Oh, yeah.
Literally the biggest piece of hunting legislation or conservation legislation, I should say, is the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
Which there's these programs called like Hunter Access Programs or HLAP. There's every state probably has a different acronym for it or something like that. And then there's CRP, which is basically what it does is it pays farmers cash or tax incentives through grants and stuff to not farm that field or to, allow hunters to hunt on it, And I know a lot of in Nebraska, a lot of times hunters will do that to the ravines in between their fields.
Yep.
And so you'll see all these little ravines and draws that are like CRP or Hunter Access Program, and essentially they're turning a buck or getting some monetary reward for allowing hunters onto their property. And then another thing too is when you go to ask somebody if you can hunt on their property, when they say yes, they're assuming liability for you. No matter, if you signed a release of liability or not. And that can be something that deters a lot of landowners from letting people hunt on their property. So the state government essentially incurs that cost or that liability for these people these farmers that are allowing people to hunt on their land.
Yeah, and I think each state handles it a little bit differently. Some states have pretty good programs put into place that are really going to allow you to maximize getting out and hunting on those public lands, and they'll have those refuges, a refuge, I'm not a refugee, created for wildlife, and then next to that they'll have that public conservation area that you can hunt.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that.
That's all I have to say about that. Okay, so there are a multitude, as we spoke, of ways that you can find these lands. I just want to do a quick plug out here. I pay for the service, and I pay for the entire year, so I'm not getting anything out of this plug, but I use OnX Maps, and it's awesome. And it compiles all this data in one spot for me. I can go to one map and see all the different public lands and private lands. If you don't want to pay for an OnX Map subscription, you can literally find these maps, scattered everywhere, and then we'll get into the finding out who owns what piece of property here in a little bit. But I think we have beat up how to find your public land, and then let's move on to step 2 in my little process, which it's determining your limits. So essentially, you need to figure out how far you're willing to travel to hunt.
Yeah.
And on what occasions, too.
Yeah, and I can kind of start this one out. I think when you're determining your limits, and determining how far you're willing to drive and look into something, so what, you're saying just for scouting or in general when you hit the hunting season?
Yeah, when we hit the hunting season, because there's spots that we have that are 10 minutes away from our houses, and then there's spots that we're traveling all the way up to Nebraska for.
Oh yeah,
and you just have to have your different categorizations. Like, hey, like this morning, we on a whim we're like, hey, come on over. We're not going to be driving to Nebraska to go hunt. We're going to head on down to our local tiny little water hole that we got to hit on the ducks.
Yeah, I guess you have to determine what the payoff is going to be, from hunting. If you're going to drive an hour away and you're going to guarantee you're going to limit out and you're going to get a 2-man or 3-man limit, then that is a factor in how far you could be willing to go. Or are you going to drive an hour away? Maybe you'll get half of a 1-man limit, 2 or 3 ducks, and then you're coming home, to a 1-year-old baby. Your wife is at home. She's pregnant with the second baby. How's the rest of that weekend going to go when you don't really have a lot to show for it? So I would say, for me, that's a factor in determining my limits.
Oh, absolutely. I would say probably my close limit, the one that I like to hit the most is I am literally stepping out of my truck within 30 minutes.
Yep.
And I'm specifically just talking driving / walking time, because you have to consider both of those things.
Well, setup too.
So setup is always a little bit of a constant for us, but I would say that if I am not literally throwing decoys out within 30 minutes, it's kind of an extended range for me. So everything that's below 30 minutes is the kind of like my sweetened bread spot, and sweetened bread spot. All right, whatever.
That's a new term.
Sweetened bread spot, baby. All right. So, and then I've got other ones that, within an hour and a half that I'm willing to hunt, And obviously, the further away, the less frequently I hunt them.
Yeah.
Unless, situations arise where I can plan something around it.
Yeah, and I think the limit, though, unfortunately, is going to be it's going to be different for each guy in each state, especially depending where they live. I mean, currently look at us, the Kansas River is a stone throw away. So, and there's hundreds of miles along the Kansas River that we could turn into a 10-minute drive, or we could turn into an hour drive and drive down past Wamego.
Yeah. And we've got 2 different spots that are about 45 minutes away from different landowners that we've known in the past. And then our third criteria is, I've got family up in Nebraska.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, though, some of those guys that live in the more inner city type environment, or I mean, we live in the suburbs, but some people that don't have the immediate access to public land right by their neighborhood, your limit naturally in that ring on your map is going to be a little bit further. And your close spot, in my mind, could be my far spot, but that's why you get out, and that's why you scout, and you determine what that limit's going to be and what the payoff is going to be.
Yeah, and I think another important thing that I kind of I think I missed on the first one is out here in the Midwest, we don't have it nearly as much because there's a lot more hunting land to be had. But places on the coast, especially I know the East Coast, I was talking to a guy that I work with that's from Massachusetts. There's a lot more urban hunting to be had on the East Coast because it's just a more condensed population and there are special permits that allow you to hunt city ponds. Whereas here, I don't think we can even shoot our bows in our backyards within city limits.
No, I don't think so.
I'm not sure. I have to call the game warden and ask about that. But, so when you're determining your limits, just make sure you talk to your partner, and not just your duck hunting partner. the most important duck hunting partner that you have is your wife, or whoever it is that is. Maybe it's your husband, whoever it is that is waiting for you when you get home, because you have to be honest, and you have to consider them, because maybe they're not as into it, or maybe they want you to get out there, but you are splitting time with a mistress that is, hunting. And
yeah,
man.
That's a good way to put it. And if you're single and you don't have anybody, then you should be out every single day of the duck season. I'm just kidding.
And screw you. No, just kidding. Yeah. So let's move on to the next step 3, setting up your Google Map. So, Austin, you've seen my Google Map. It is quite extensive. I've put about 5 years of work into that thing. Literally every time I see a deer, doesn't even matter if I'm on vacation. For I think it was Doug's bachelor party that we went up to in the Pacific Northwest, and I saw a deer, and so I pulled out my map and I logged it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's good though, because you've harvested all this data and research, and then you've really created your I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but you have all these points within your Google Map that you've saved, and then over the years you can go back and you can really track where you've been and where you want to go.
Each one of those
it's so easy to
story.
do.
Yeah. So what I do is you go to Google Maps. If you don't have a Google account, do that. And then you can go into Maps, My Maps, and create a new one and start setting up your layers. Now, I screwed up in the very genesis of my map and didn't quite have a organization system for my points, and I pay for it to this day. I can't filter through all my points because I've got close to, if not 2,000, I've got 1,500 different points on there, and absolutely no rhyme or reason other than a rough color scheme that I've incorporated. And so when you're just start off with these layers, have a duck hunting layer, have a deer hunting layer, have a water layer, have a path layer, an access layer, food, boundaries, trails, turkey, whatever. Create the different layers and stay on top of it, and then you'll probably benefit from that a lot more than me. I was even thinking about hiring one of those virtual assistants, to...
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, essentially what you're talking about is knowledge management on the digital scope, and a lot of people do it at work. A lot of people have great knowledge management and storage of their data, between files and their color schemes. And, and if you work with anything that requires the use of geotags and geolocations in a map, and I've seen it obviously through the work that we do, and this can be stored and organized very well, and there's no reason that you can't do that with hunting either. Google or any other means provides an excellent opportunity to log and store all those points, and to set that up in a scheme and organization that makes sense to find during the hunting season. Because I guess what I can tell you is that most people now in today's age are doing that. And if you're not doing some kind of knowledge management like that, then there's a good chance that you could get stepped on when you go out hunting, because most of the guys have their iPad or their iPhone right in front of them, and they've got that point pulled up, and they've got the distance and direction, and they just hit it, and then the boat's heading right to it.
Yeah. And so people might be asking, well, why don't I just do this on my onX Maps app? And I'll tell you, so it's really good. A lot of those apps have excellent navigation systems, much better than Google Earth. But for consolidating all that information and organizing it, a lot of these hunting apps, they don't have it yet. There's just no way to store that much data or color code or do it quick and conveniently like Google Maps does. But yeah, like I said, it is kind of annoying switching back and forth. And like, the night before we go on a hunt that I've, only been out there a couple times, you're dang right. I'll take that Google Map point, and I'll throw it in the onX navigation system, because the onX navigation system is pretty good, and I'll load that point up. But you'll find what works for you. And then it's super important. The other thing too is that when you set up a point, it has a notes section in it, and you can record everything you want about that location in that notes section. You know, that could be a landowner's name, phone number, hunting success dates, or like saw deer at this time, harvested, 4 green-winged teal on this date at this time. Here was the weather observation. So the next time you go to look at that, you can have that pulled up. And then also it is fun to kind of sift through all of your notes on your points and just see what you've written in the past, So that's pretty fun.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think it takes discipline, though, because I find myself, I think every hunting season, that's what I start doing. I start digitally, tracking what I'm going to do. And I've got my points saved, and then I've got my notes. But then, by the end of the season, I feel like I've really slacked off on making sure that I filled in each of those spots and each of those notes. And it's kind of funny. You can really lose track of what you've done in a hunting season once you stop logging everything.
Yeah.
So I would say don't get discouraged if you don't have everything logged. This is just a great way to find where you want to go and keep track of what you've seen.
Yeah, and if you're like Austin, you can just rely on your buddy's good map like I do, and you can share that map.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'll just go to sleep early, wake up late, and then wait for you to upload the newest location.
Yeah, or the newest podcast, too. I find I'm doing a lot of podcast editing. No, just kidding, buddy. You're busier than get up. So I think let's talk about. So if you're pretty technologically savvy, you can also use Google Earth instead of Google Maps. And I think a lot of people do prefer Google Earth because it has a little bit higher functionality. I don't use it just because I started off on Google Maps. And I know that I can export all my points and stuff like that and throw them onto Google Earth. I just am not as... I don't necessarily find a need for it, other than I know that Google Earth does do one really good thing, and that is that you can look at historical satellite images. So you can get a picture of what it might have looked like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at, I think, what you're trying to get out of it. I've used Google Earth a lot for other work-related type events to try to determine distance, and direction, and then a lot of slope and elevation. So I think if you're going to go hike through a pass or through a mountain to get to where you want for duck hunting, then I would definitely use Google Earth to get that slope and elevation.
It has that stuff in it already?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Most Google Earth does, and you can kind of draw your line across, and then it'll determine.
So I'm a Neanderthal, and I've been going on to my own, finding these third-party things to do that for me, and I guess
I don't know. Maybe that's Google Earth you have to pay for. I guess what I'm saying is you don't need that to get to a boat ramp or to get to a levee and put in to where you're going to wade to, especially if it's like a sandbar type scenario in the Kansas River. But yeah, that's way advanced. It's awesome when you look at it, but you can get the job done with Google Maps. And I would be remiss if I just didn't throw this in there. And I sound like my dad talking to me, but don't forget, after all this digital stuff that we talk about, don't forget just how to use a map and compass though too. And I'm sure that's a whole nother episode that we've got planned in a whole nother technique. And I don't mean to digress from the digital one, but I can find myself really getting tunnel visioned on the screen of an iPad and Google Maps. And then when you get out and your feet are in the water and you actually take a look at the direction that you're going, the physical environment is completely different than the digital environment.
Yeah.
So don't forget how to use terrain features and actual, land navigation just to its basics without using your iPhone.
Right. Yeah. Don't be that guy that has to
Especially if
rely
your
on
iPhone's not charged because you were on Instagram all night prior to hunting. So
yeah, don't be that guy that has to rely on. And I've been that guy. Maybe once I've been that guy where I had to use my phone to figure out where north was. But hey, it was dark, and it was a circular pond. I don't,
yeah.
I couldn't see the truck. So
No, but that's what I mean. I think you can do plenty of digital scouting, and I think we're probably getting onto that next. But if you don't do, the physical scouting and understand the physical terrain that you're going into, you could find out that everything looked a lot different than it did on Google Maps on your phone.
Yeah, how many? I wonder how many times I've placed way too much faith and confidence in the old Google Maps.
Me too. I think everybody does.
But yeah, we gotta. We'll get into that.
I digress.
Okay, so let's talk about the public land only method. So now we've got a map and we've got all of our resources, being like we know where all the public land is. So I start off by marking all the public spots that I found on those earlier maps that we were talking about onto my Google Maps. And I utilize my limits. So I'm not putting in Halsey National Forest, 700 miles away. I'm only worried about stuff that's within, 100 miles of me. So we start off by marking all the public spots that we found on the earlier maps and finding the public lands where they start, where they end, and then keep an eye out for, mostly you're looking for water spots, and we'll get more into specifically what you need to be looking for here in just a minute. But there's a reason that the first part of waterfowl is water. So just going to talk about some of the different spots that I've found just specifically from finding online. So there's a spot in El Paso, Texas, just right outside. It's literally probably half a mile from a trailer park on the edge of the desert. But I saw this little dot of public land on the map, and I said, "What the heck is that?" Like just a little tiny, like almost looked like something was on my screen, and so I zoomed in, and okay, little thing of public land there. Okay, I'm gonna go check it out, and so I walk in there and set up, half a dozen decoys and a mojo, and next thing you know, and I'm talking like 4:30, p.m. in the afternoon, I got a limit of blue-winged teal, and just from this tiny little spot that, I bet I'm probably one of a handful of people that's ever actually truly hunted there. I even talked to the game warden about it because I was concerned about how close it was, and he said, "You're the first guy that's ever even talked. I got to look into that." And he'd been working there for 5 years.
This is a conservation area?
It was
wildlife management area?
No, it was believe it was Bureau of Land Management.
Oh, okay.
And it was, I think what had happened is that Bureau of Land Management had owned a bunch of property over there.
Yeah.
But
I feel like I remember this text though.
Probably, yes. Yeah. And there was, I think the Bureau of Land Management, it had been sold off to public land or to private land, but they retained the key water feature in there to make sure that nobody did anything with it, and ended up with just this little 80-yard by 20-yard strip of water, the kind of little tiny oasis in the desert that it had private property on all sides of it, but had a clearly marked river bed that you could access it through without going onto private property. And I think it just kind of got forgotten about over time. I mean, especially if the game warden didn't even had to check my map to. So yeah, it's little things like that. And another thing, another interesting one that I've found was the International Boundary Water Commission. So in El Paso, you can hunt the Rio Grande. Literally, the Mexico is on the other side of where you're hunting. I've had ducks fall into Mexico, and I have had Mexican ranch hands from Juarez toss my ducks back over into the river for me. You know,
This didn't violate any kind of like immigration. I mean, those ducks are Mexican, and you brought them over to the United States.
I don't know what it was, but
That's
I saw these farmers. They were pushing a bunch of cattle, and they were about a quarter mile away from me. And some ducks came in. I shot. I remember one duck went down into the river and went and retrieved that, but the other duck hit the other bank and was just out of arm's reach, and one of them old boys, he sprinted over there on his horse, and I'm not kidding you. This really happened, and he said, "Platos," and I was like, "Oh, man." Well, I don't know what that word is. Later, I think it's duck or something.
Yeah, it definitely is duck.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
And he rooted around into the through the brush there, and he found it, and I thought, oh, well, I guess he's going to keep it, and he chucked it back over there for me, and quite an interesting retrieve, I think.
Gosh, yeah, not all of us hunt in the Mexican-U.S. border, though. That is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I learned,
Yeah.
It's interesting things. But anyway, so there's small agencies like these, like the International Boundary Water Commission, that ain't on no public map. I had to Google that after somebody told me that I could hunt there, and they had literally, it was just, I'll talk about it in Tales and Tips, my first time heading down to the Rio Grande, but some of these places take some extra research and legwork. Like there's some wetland management areas that have very specific rules. Like you can't hunt after 1 p.m. You can't hunt on this little sliver. You can't do this. So you have to do your homework, and don't be intimidated by that. And do not hesitate to call the people whose names are on the bottom of these documents, whose names are attached to these rules and regulations.
Yeah,
they'll walk you through it.
That's an extremely good point, because when I was hunting up in the Pacific Northwest in the state of Washington, their conservation or Department of Wildlife website has all these little blue dots. But it's like a pin on Google Maps where all the public land is that you can hunt, and you literally click on each one of those, and it brings up the name and number of whatever that conservation area is. And then at the bottom, I think the phone numbers were generally the same. They just differ by 1 or 2 digits based on the region. Mm-hmm. It had a point of contact to call and talk to. And every single time, especially in the state of Washington, where I'm not even sure how hunting is legal based off the regulations, but hunting is legal. You have to call and you have to double check what the regs are, specifically to sometimes the hunting ends at 1 o'clock, and sometimes that hole is only available Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and every fourth Sunday, that comes around in the month. But yeah, you cannot just find the land digitally and then drive up to it and then dump your decoys in there and expect to hunt without any issues. If you're going the public land only method, follow up with a phone call, and most of the time you'll just find more revealing information than you even knew about.
Right.
And you'll find out that it's actually, there's way more that you can do there. And most of those guys who run that conservation agent that owns that little region, they'll generally give you some good tips on other places surrounding there that you can go into that are more advantageous.
Not duck hunting at all. Completely related just to whitetail hunting. I did that same thing, and I asked the biologist out there, and he gave me the lowdown. He told me, hey, go to this, set your odometer when you get to 3/4 of a mile, hit this gate, follow this trail. There's a deer stand out there. You should use that one.
Yeah. No, I would definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So should we transition into not only finding public land, but also finding private land to hunt on? Okay. So very similar. Start from your home, and identify the city limits. Because most municipalities don't allow you to hunt within the city limits, at least out, past west of the Mississippi. But like I said, on the coast, there are some urban hunting opportunities. Anyways, So I work out in kind of a circular fashion from my house, and I am just trying to identify bodies of water. Every time I find one, I mark it with a yellow question mark point, and then I move on. And then, I mark them in a pending status, just like that. And so once I've, littered my map with all these potential spots, I root through and I find the ones that are most appealing to me that I actually want to pursue. And it is a numbers game. So what I'll do is I'll use my onX map, and I will bounce it off there, and I will attach a name to that property, whoever owns the property. Now, there's other ways that you can find these names.
I was going to say, how do guys reach out if they don't have onX Maps?
Perfect. So onX Maps got this information from somewhere, and it's called land or surface ownership maps. SOMs or LISWs and stuff like that. Every county, it's public information.
Yeah.
It is public information, and you can go out. You can either go to your courthouse and get that information, or you can Google surface ownership map, whatever county. And a lot of times they have digital ones. I know Texas has one. I know New Mexico has one. I haven't had to use them anywhere else. The other method you can do if you can't find that is figure out what the address of that place is, and then Google that address. That's a little harder, but you can find some identifying features. And if not, look for the properties that have houses on them, and then just go knock.
Yeah, I would say so. Basically, we're talking about that's the end state. How do we knock on this guy's door? How do we knock on the farmer's door? And I guess too, how generally do we think that they're going to want to be communicated with? Some guys want that face to face, and I know you've kind of got a whole bit about that. And then others are okay with just a phone call, and then others are even okay with an email or Facebook message.
Yeah, and so I've had it happen a multitude of ways. So either I drove past their house when they were there, or I drove past their house, saw their mailbox, jot down their address, and then do a reverse lookup in the phone book. And then there's other times where I just literally, and this is so millennial of me, I see their name on my onX maps or on my surface ownership, and I I Facebook their names. And
some would call that stalking.
It is stalking. But it's worked out for me, and I've had landowners really appreciate it, and then I've had others that completely ignore it, and then I've had others that say, "Hey, I don't wish to be contacted in this manner." I'm always apologetic, straight up front. Sorry for reaching out to you in this manner, but I find that when you can write them, either be it a Facebook message, an email if you can find one, or even just a letter in the mail, you do get a little bit more success than just cold calling or, that knock, because you can get your whole story out there on paper under no pressure for them to even finish it. And then you can explain your entire situation to them. And a lot of people will be able to have all of the facts right there in front of them and make a much more informed decision.
Yeah. I'm just kind of like looking at our methods here and, trying to see what's worked for me or what's the easiest. I'm just trying to imagine myself like in the summertime sitting down and writing all my letters out to all the landowners to try to get on their land. No, I'm just kind of kidding, but I think the face to face is great. That's my preferred way because I also like to know whose land am I hunting on? Right. What's the feel and what's the vibe of this farmer? Is he coming after me with the 20 gauge shotgun because he's a little bit older and didn't remember that I told him I was going to be driving on his land in the morning? But the opportunistic finds. Another thing that I'm kind of looking at here is, God, those are my most favorite. When somebody tells me, hey, I know somebody who knows somebody who said you can hunt, and then all the work's pretty well done because that guy has already put that offer out.
But honestly,
those
that's
aren't
what
always around.
My Facebook approach generates that more often than not. Like, hey, I'm not interested in having you hunt on my property. However, neighbor XYZ is.
Yep. Yeah.
So here's his number. And then you're talking about opportunistic things, right? So, like I said, can't find anybody online. A lot of farmers and agrarian folk are like that, and so you go find their house, go knock, say what's up, give them your pitch, and that's that. The other one that this happened to me this last season, I'm out there glassing, looking for some geese, and I follow these geese into this field, and they put down, and just so happens, the landowner is sitting there on the back of his tailgate, and I roll up, and I said, he's sitting there having a beer with his wife and his neighbor, I presume, and I said, hey, those geese bugging you any? And he said, you want to hunt them? And I said, yeah. And he said, all right, like, here's the key to the gate. Like, you going right now? And I said, oh, no. Do you mind if we go tomorrow afternoon? And he said, sure, just hang the key back up, and here's my number, and let me know whenever you're going to be there.
What Ben is saying is, if you're an extrovert, this method will work. If you're an introvert, this method will not work. No, you have to be able to talk to people and not be afraid just not be afraid to talk to the landowner.
Right.
Especially when the guy is out there, and the opportunity presents itself, because that's the best way to get onto those private lands.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to remember about that is that this is a numbers game.
Yeah.
I would say that probably from the time that I spot a hole that I want to pursue on the internet to the time that I'm actually out there sitting in there hunting it, it's probably 1 in 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know you've got, another thing and kind of topic to look at is networking through some of the bigger foundations like Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, so Upland Bird Hunting, Pheasants Forever. This is another thing, though, that can provide a lot of good information, but I think these have another intimidation factor, too. How many guys are a member maybe of the local DU or Delta Waterfowl chapter that they're going to actually give you their little honey holes in their private spots. So that may not always be the easiest, but you won't know, and you won't know about some of these private lands if you don't get involved in some of those local events and go to some of those like DU banquets. That is a great way just to get the feel of what's going on in your area, and then you'd be surprised the amount of private land opportunities to reach out to that are going to come available.
Yeah, and I would say, so if you talk to me at a Ducks Unlimited banquet, I will take you to my private land, and we will go hunt. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I might not take you to my favorite public hunting spot because there's something to be said about. And actually, hold on, let me pause here real quick. I don't think we today are going to get to the actual scouting and what to look for. So we might have just found ourselves another episode, and we're just going to stick to just the digital methods right now because we're sitting at almost an hour.
Yeah.
So
we rambled on a lot, but I think there's some good rambling.
So anyways, back to it. I look at every time I meet someone out in the field, or any time that I meet somebody, a new duck hunter that is not a jackwagon or someone that I don't want to spend any time with. They are another tool, another resource to me, because just like think about this, you and me. So I go out and I can find all the public hunting, all the maybe the private spots that I can find. But when we split that work up, you're out there. I mean, literally, there's 2 private spots that you have access to that I would have never had access to without you. And so just in the same way that you have access to a couple of my private spots, that sounded terrible. But
this is a PG podcast.
Yeah, it is. It is. Any misconstrued metaphors are all on you as the listener, not on me. But I call it kind of teaming up or duck clubbing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think
just in the same way that we share decoys, we share hunting spots.
Yep.
And I'm never going to go to one of your private spots without you.
Right.
Just the same way that you would never do the same thing to me. And actually, we're a little different because we're kin almost when it comes to this stuff. But don't ever shy away from somebody that wants to talk to you about duck hunting, because that might be your new boy. You know,
Yeah,
that's another 3 dozen decoys that you can utilize.
Yep, it's just the basics of networking. And when you meet somebody new, and that guy can get you out to another spot, and then you guys can start sharing those spots and that knowledge management, kind of my phrase of the morning, I guess, then you could turn out to have a pretty good season.
Right. And so, like, I'm in a hunt club. It's not just waterfowl, but it's High Prairie Sportsman, and you can find them on Facebook. It's one of my buddies, Matt. He does a lot of videography and stuff like that. But through giving them content, media content, and stuff like that, I've met dudes on there that, and so like, I know that when I go up to Nebraska, if I'm really hurting to find a place to hunt a deer or hunt a while I'm up there, I could reach out to any one of those dudes, and they're gonna say, "Hey, we're going out this time." You know what I mean? Bring a dozen decoys and your blind and maybe some snacks.
Oh yeah.
So yep. But like I said, so if you're listening to this as it comes out, now is the time. This is the most productive time for me for finding land to hunt on. Because one, we have the reverse migration, which we can kind of scout right now.
Yep.
And then the other thing too is you have a little bit more success when you are looking presentable walking up to someone's door, as opposed to having duck blood all over your face, mud on your boots, and looking like a Neanderthal coming straight out of the mud blind. Hey, I just saw some ducks, and it gives the landowner a little bit of buffer time to think it over.
Well, and especially if you're willing to, let's say, like trade labor maybe for going out to hunt. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done on private farming lands in the spring and summertime. And if you find a Saturday morning or a Saturday afternoon that you've got free and you can offer up to that guy, and you pay those dividends now in the spring and summertime. And I'm not saying you have to go become his next farmhand, but because gosh, I probably am looking for the guy that's going to let me go hunt and then hope that he doesn't ask me to go load up a whole flatbed trailer of hay, because I did enough of that in high school. But if you've got that time and you pay it forward now, yeah, you could find yourself in a pretty good spot, and you could find yourself being that farmer's number one guy, and potentially even an exclusive spot that he's not going to let anybody else come hunt on.
Right. Man, so let's cover just this last bullet point real quick, and then that kind of gives us a natural break, and we will get into the actual scouting, what you need to do when boots on the ground. It's hunting season, how to scout these birds. We're going to have to do another episode.
Yeah.
Wasn't expecting to be able to talk about this for that long, and apparently we can. But, oh man, I don't know. I might eat crow here on this one. I might be opening up a can of worms. But ornithology websites are amazing resources for patterning and scouting birds, and even finding public huntable land that you may have missed. So I'm not going to name any specific websites, because I'm sure that they wouldn't appreciate me to do that, and I'm just trying to be respectful. But there's a number of social media ornithology, and if you're not familiar with ornithology, it's bird watching websites where these ornithologists can go on there. These bird watchers can log where they see what kind of bird, where, when, how many, and you can really get a really good picture of when the migration moves through. They have data going back to 1990, I think. So you can go in there and get a good picture for what how birds move through your area, what kind of birds move through your area, where they're concentrating. Another thing too is whether you want to believe it or not, you're an ornithologist. You're a bird watcher. You care now about this stuff, and it's just another online tool to utilize.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's definitely out there because according to this, like, decline in hunters, article we were talking about from NPR, as the decline in hunters increases, meanwhile, they're saying other wildlife activities such as bird watching and hiking and photography are actually rapidly growing. So those resources are out there.
Yep. And along with that, there's a respect disclaimer there too. You don't need to be going around, asking ornithologists like, "Hey, where'd you see this thing?"
So
I'm
I can go track it down and kill it.
Right? Yeah, and one of those things. But I think we should wrap this episode up, and y'all can look forward to, now that you know how to digitally find that stuff. We'll talk next week or so on how we can actually get our boots muddy and use our binoculars and what we're actually looking for in all these spots, so that you can know where you can hunt, but then you can whittle that down into knowing where you should hunt. So
yeah, I think it was a good a good wealth of information that was put out. And it took us an hour to put it out. Most of the stuff that we talked about, you could probably log on and start to put together and data mine within half an hour and get yourself out the door to go scout.
Yep. So that's an excellent resource. So you get out there, start setting that stuff up, and then maybe by the next episode, you'll actually have something to look at, and you might even have a new hunting property. So, all right. Well,
thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Foul Front Waterfowl Podcast. Please come join us on our Facebook group, the Foul Front Waterfowl Podcast group, where you can connect with a good group of hunters, because we're all in this together. We need to act like it so that hopefully our great grandkids will be hunting ducks over our favorite public lands. We also ask that you go ahead and give us a written review on iTunes and give us 5 stars if you think we deserve it. And we really do want to hear back from you so that we can give you the best possible content. And if you get in on that Facebook group, you can get in there and you can ask questions and you can tell us what you want to hear next, or you can tell us what you don't like, and we'll be sure to tailor things to our listeners. So, all right. Stay safe out there, and we will see you next week.